Hello and welcome to Science Unscripted. It's Conor here.
And Gabe?
Homelessness, or being unhoused, not having a home. This is something that I think anecdotally for a lot of you out there, it feels like it's on the rise, partially because of, I don't know, prices going up everywhere, inflation.
Hard to get housing.
There's a shortage.
Less of it, more expensive.
I was convinced that that's objectively true. Homelessness is on the rise everywhere. I looked at OECD data, and it's not that clear cut in the UK. Homelessness has doubled since 2011. In the US, it's gone up in the last 5 years, but it's at about the same levels as right after the 2008 financial crisis. South Korea, it has dropped from 0.3% of the population down to 0.2% of the population. So it really depends where you are, and you can't cross-compare because every country measures this differently. But some of you out there probably, again, anecdotally also have this feeling that it seems more prevalent, or it seems like you're encountering it more often now.
We're going to speak in a bit with a researcher from Australia. She did a study on unhoused people and the police. But before we speak about these people, we needed to speak with them. And the closest ones are obviously the homeless here in Bonn. So the first guy we met, his name's Robin.
And I'm homeless since 6 months right now.
And how old are you, Robin? You don't seem like you seem young.
Yeah, I know I look younger than I am. I am 25.
Do you get harassed by the police when you're here on the streets right now? You have a paper cup on the ground. People can put coins in it. Do you get harassed for that?
Actually, no. I never have been.
You've been out here for 6 months and you've never once been harassed by the police?
No, never. They came to me and asked what happened to me and how they maybe could help. So they sent me to some organizations which could help me. So actually, yeah, I would say they helped me more than they harassed me.
You said the police offer you help, or advice at least, on where to get help. Do you take it, or do you prefer to be here, or what's your plan? Is there a plan, or is this it for now?
Right now, that's not the plan. I'm trying to get a room at the Caritas.
And there's no room right now, or?
Right now, there's no rooms.
Where do you go when it gets dark? Where do you go to sleep?
I'm trying to get into a hostel, or when it's not working, then I'm sleeping outside on the floor. I mean, I have a mattress also. Yeah. And when it's sunny, it's no problem.
What are those nights like? Sleeping on your own outside?
When I'm sleeping outside, I'm trying to not be alone, to be with other people, because it's much safer, of course. And I try to be on a place where a camera or something is near to me, like an underground station.
Is this new to you? You said 6 months. Is this the first time you've lived like this?
Yeah, this is the first time, and yeah, I'm trying to get out of this as fast as possible.
What were you doing before?
I'm not sure if it's called undertaker. I buried people actually. That's what I did for a living.
You don't have to answer this if you don't feel comfortable, but was there a moment that led to you being here, something 6 months ago, where you made a decision or somebody else made a decision that brought you to this clothing store here?
Yeah, there was a moment which happened with my father. He went into jail and the government could not help me with the rent for the house where we lived in. It was too much for me. And yeah, I had around 2 months to search for a new apartment, and that was not possible. So I had to leave the house.
Your dad's in jail? Does he know that you're on the street?
He knows it. I haven't visited him, but sometimes we write letters to each other to stay in contact.
Are you doing okay?
Yeah, I'm pretty okay. Yeah, it can always be better, but it can always be much worse, I think. I mean, I have seen a lot of other homeless people who are drug addicted, heavy drug addicts. They cannot care for them anymore. They don't shower or something. It's horrible to see that, and I'm glad that I'm not at this point.
You were working as an undertaker before. Do you have a chance to go back to that job or one like it? Are you looking for something similar, or is it more about finding a place to live first?
It's kind of necessary to have a bed. I mean, a address on your passport or something to find a job, because when you apply for a job and you cannot give them an address, they know you're homeless, and then they probably won't take you, which is understandable, I think. Yeah.
That number I mentioned before, the huge jump in homelessness in Bonn, refers to the people without an apartment. And what he's speaking there about is how impossible for him it is to get an apartment right now?
Right. So that number includes people who are already housed publicly.
Yeah.
So it's
he's one of the between 80 and 100 who are sleeping on the street.
Right, and are in desperate need of housing.
Another one of them is Rodik. And this guy's interesting because he has a perspective that not many people do. He's been homeless in a lot of different countries all around Europe.
Whoa, I had many experience. I had a problem with the Guardia Civil. I had a problem with the D1 in France. I had a problem with the police in Poland. I had problems with the police, special force of police in Portugal. They beat me up for nothing.
What does that feel like when the police with you?
It's a pain. It's a pain. And they take you down, and they beat you, and they kick you, and they drive on you. My God, it's horrible. Sometimes it's horrible.
And here, no problems, or?
No, it's the most soft. I have to admit that. They quite lovely.
They're lovely.
They're lovely. Yeah, they are. They are. I can't complain.
And you could probably hear there, Rodik had been drinking. I think we talked to him at about, I don't know what time that was, 11 in the morning. And I think he's been...
We're going to hear him on the guitar later. And he was apologizing for his playing, even though I thought it was unbelievably beautiful. Exquisitely beautiful, to borrow a line from Brent, one of our listeners. But he was apologizing that he was so drunk.
Yeah, and I guess what was interesting about talking to them, or something that we heard, we talked to a lot of different people. Not all of them wanted to be recorded, understandably, was that the common theme, there were some exceptions, but the common theme was that the police, at least in this one city, Bonn, Germany, are relatively friendly. And that's also the perception. I'm not trying to be biased. If it was the opposite, if they'd said the opposite, I would say that. Mm-hmm. But they were saying consistently, and Rodik there, who's been in all these EU countries without a home, was saying that they're lovely here. It's not the case that the police are constantly, harassing them, attacking them. Lovely is how he described it. And the others had similar things to say. They were mostly there to help. The study out of Australia, I think, is closer to what tends to happen more often elsewhere.
Yeah, it's the opposite, really. The people that were spoken to as part of this study came from all around Australia, all the major cities in Australia and some rural areas. And they spoke about a hyper-policing. That's actually the title of the study, and we're going to hear now about that and what it does to these people to be constantly harassed from Thalia Anthony.
Science Unscripted.
Hi, my name's Thalia Anthony, and I'm a Professor of Law at the University of Technology, Sydney. I'm an expert in criminal law, especially as it relates to marginalised groups, and I just published a paper on the over-policing of homeless people on the streets.
And what was the conclusion of that paper, Thalia?
So the conclusion of the paper was that people experiencing homelessness tend to fear the police as their primary safety concern. And of all the criminal justice interventions, whether it's courts or prisons, it was police that they felt had the most intervention in their lives.
How many unhoused people did you speak with for this paper?
So we spoke to over 160 unhoused people across the country. So we talked to people in all capital cities and also regional towns.
And what questions were you asking them?
We asked them about their interaction with all stages of the criminal justice system. So not only policing, but also whether they had gone to court, their experience with lawyers, whether they'd gone to prison, their experience with parole. So it was a fairly broad reach. But what they continuously wanted to speak about was policing.
One thing I have to clarify here, because I'm surprised at one thing you just said, which is that the police the police are the largest source of fear for unhoused people. My assumption from the outside would have been, well, what if I'm, I don't know, sleeping in an alleyway or sleeping outside and somebody else comes and attacks me? But was that part of the question as well? And were they really most fearful of the police?
So they absolutely did raise issues of violence by other people on the street, including unhoused people. But when they talked about their experiences of being harassed and direct violence, they most commonly regarded the police as the constant source of that threat. And I think that's because they had, often daily interactions with the police. So they felt quite targeted by the police, whereas other acts of violence might be more incidental, whereas the police felt quite concerted.
And what did these 160 people have to say about the police? What was the common denominator when they were describing their relationship with law enforcement?
The common denominator was that the police were always in their lives, even if it wasn't for a coercive purpose. So they would come up to them, ask them how they're going, ask for their name, and it would often escalate into checking whether they had a warrant out on them. It can escalate into charges. But even where there weren't charges, they just felt that the police were too involved in their lives, and then that meant that they were not free on the streets. So what we commonly heard was them saying not that they wanted better policing, but that they just wanted the police to leave them alone.
So it's not necessarily violent attacks by police officers on them. It's the fact that they're just getting bothered. They're getting bugged. They're getting annoyed by police officers every day.
Absolutely, Connor. And it's a situation where, it can be very low-level annoyance of just being asked all the time how they're going, even in the same day being asked what their name is and having a warrant check. Or it could be really annoying things like they're sleeping, finally found a safe place to sleep. They've got all their belongings. It's 2 a.m. The police get the torches out, flash it in their face, tell them to move on, to a place outside of the CBD, kilometres away. And they have to do that, at a time when they feel very vulnerable, where they're made to move to a place that's unfamiliar. And so that kind of activity can really play with their mental health, play with their sense of security as a homeless person, and I think ultimately make them feel continuously stigmatized, that they're the problem, even though, internally they're feeling like they have the problem of homelessness, but they're being positioned as the problem on the street.
Thalia, you're a professor of law, so this maybe isn't your beat, but what did these 160 people have to say about that psychological effect? What is it doing to them to be constantly hounded, no matter whether they're breaking the rules or not, by the police?
They felt like they couldn't settle, so it would result in significant anxiety and a sense of, I think, obviously there's placelessness physically, but a loss of identity internally, because before they were homeless, many of these people had jobs. They obviously had homes at some point. They had families. And so they have an identity that is not just about being unhoused, but the police make them feel like they are nothing more than a problem on the streets. And I think that really affects their confidence and their capacity to, be empowered and deal with the crisis of homelessness that's confronting them, because they're pushed further into that crisis.
Before your study, I have to be honest and say that I really viewed the police as a useful and effective tool for dealing with the situation that is, for a lot of people, scary, uncomfortable, connected to the current economic situation. It seems I hear people back in the United States, for example, saying they don't travel to downtown Seattle, for example, because the homelessness situation is so out of control in tent cities, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think a lot of people like myself before now thought of the police as the tool for dealing with that perceived danger. Can you help our listeners out there, and basically me too, to change my way of thinking? How should we think about how the police should interact with unhoused people?
That's such a difficult question to answer, because it wasn't something that the participants in this research spoke a lot about. They didn't tell us what better policing would look like. They suggested that they wanted other workers to be involved to support them and to keep them safe. I guess what's embedded in your question is potentially that having a lot of homeless people on the streets is a safety risk, and that potentially they do commit crime, including to the public. And I don't know if that's a fact. And I do wonder whether part of the media representation of homeless people is that they're a crime problem, and therefore the state has to respond by police to make us feel safe. So I definitely think there's a political reason for that, but I'm not sure that it's based in evidence. I think the police have a role in moving on homeless people, where it does become, the optics of homelessness becomes a problem for a suburb, especially more gentrified areas. And I also think it's a way in which people may perceive safety if there are police around, but it's certainly not a way in which homeless people perceive safety. So I would think for the public to be safe, it would be much better to house these people rather than to have police around these people.
And again, that was Thalia Anthony talking to us there. I believe we mispronounced her name throughout that interview. Apologies.
Called her Thalia.
Yeah, closer to the German. And
there is science behind what she said there at the end. Housing first. There was a meta-analysis done on the science behind homelessness. How do you reduce it? If you want to reduce it, how do you do it?
Well, if there's one thing you can do,
housing first. There was 26 studies they were looking at, and they came to the conclusion that if you give permanent housing to a homeless person, it reduces it by 88% compared to what's known as treatment first, getting all their other issues set up or fixed first before you give them housing. No.
Well, that's logical enough, and I read that, and it confirmed what I guess I was biased to believe is true. But even though we had planned to kind of end this there, we thought, well, let's go check in with some of the people or the organizations responsible for giving them housing in the first place and see if they also agree that that's the most important thing.
There is an initiative, what's called an offensive, the Bonn offensive, to eradicate homelessness by 2030. And we spoke to one of the people working for that offensive, Helena Marx, and she said, it's important.
It's not the only thing.
But not at all the only thing.
If an unhoused person walks over here right now and they get a place to stay for months, is that the biggest change that you could possibly do to help somebody who's living that way, who's living on the streets?
Menschen, die von Wohnungslosigkeit betroffen sind, eine Wohnung zu geben, kann sehr viel.
Giving people who are homeless a place to live can make a huge difference. It makes them a part of society. But social support and healthcare is also needed. If that person has a psychiatric disorder, it's possible that they will lose the home they were given. It's true, housing is needed first and foremost, but we cannot forget the things that provide stability so that they can keep their home over the long term.
Menschen herum Stabilität geben, damit die Wohnung langfristig gehalten werden kann.
This has been a long report here about homelessness, or the science of what to do with unhoused people here in Bonn, and it makes it look like we want to paint Bonn in a really, really good light, but it wasn't. Not everyone we spoke to on the street was happy about the situation or what's being done for the unhoused people in Bonn. And the last guy we're going to hear from here is a guy named Snoopy.
That's how he called himself.
Yeah. Both legs amputated, open wounds. He's had a rough go of it.
Es ist so hart. Wie gesagt, am 23. Januar nächstes Jahr, also 2025, bin ich 20 Jahre im Bonner Loch. Nie war es so hart wie jetzt.
It is so hard.
Yeah.
On January 23rd, 2025, it will be 20 years for me living on the street in Bonn, and it's never been as hard as it is now. I can't park my wheelchair anywhere without the police or security telling me to move. People only have credit cards. They don't have spare change anymore. Even if they wanted to give, do you think I have a card reader? I don't even have a bank account. So I can't pay for anything. It's absolutely insane how hard it's become. And that word insane doesn't even do it justice. There's no word in the German language that could describe my life. And yes, I have tears in my eyes right now, because it hurts to see this happen. I feel left alone. That's it. End of story.
Ja, und ich habe jetzt gerade Tränen in meinen Augen, weil es mir wehtut, das mir anzusehen. Ich fühle mich verlassen. Fertig. Punkt.
Yeah. And that brings us to the end of a situation, a difficult topic to talk about, because I think a lot of us don't hear from people without a house very often, right? Is that part of it?
That was one of the things that Thalia said, that she wanted to give these people a voice by doing scientific work about them. But if it does nothing else, it gives you a different perspective on people you don't want to see. Who wants to see this? Homeless, it's scary.
You also mean that in a positive way.
Yeah, of course we want it to go away optically, but also
to be solved.
Yeah.
And it is complex. And it includes housing, and that's what needs to be built. But yeah, a very difficult topic at a time where I think it is important to talk about it, because again, it feels somewhat anecdotally. It's also about how various media channels talk about the housing situation and unhoused people, and which channels you listen to. But I think it's important to understand how they experience the world, and how the police, which I, prior to this report, thought were like the solution, the ones helping the situation and making it all better, can also be the ones making it worse.
Yeah. Yeah, and with every complex situation, you're going to have different views, and I'm sure that you guys have them. So let us know where you stand on any of the issues that we spoke about today. SCU@dw.com.